back courtyard. Just there.
Oh my gosh, I love her.
Just a little shady spot there.
Goodness,
On
because
the
we were
ground.
like, what are we
Tables and
gonna do?
chairs.
Okay. Are we gonna get our name tags?
What?
Our name tags or
Yeah.
Showing out.
Yeah.
When did you get here? You've been on last week,
no, just 2 nights ago.
and you're leaving tomorrow?
Yes.
God,
I know.
that's a lot of travel.
It is. I've been on the road 10 weeks.
Oh. What was your route here?
I went, let's see, I left Washington, D.C., and I went to Cairo,
Straight to
or
Cairo.
there was one other stop.
You don't even remember, do
I
you?
don't even remember where it was. Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Mine was long. I've been here a week and a half.
Oh, Vienna,
Vienna.
Cairo.
I went from San Francisco to New York to Dublin, Dublin to Istanbul, Istanbul to
Oh,
Sharp.
wow.
And 2 of those were like 10-hour layovers.
Oh my goodness, did you get out or did you stay in the airport?
I did both.
Oh,
I
okay.
actually found in New York the old TWA hotel that was built in 1962.
Yes.
And it's by Saarinen, the great architect who did the Dulles Airport and stuff like that. It's still there.
No.
And you can cross the road and get a day room.
Really?
And I did.
Oh, that works.
That was great. And in Dublin, I sort of did the same thing. I just
Okay.
got a room where I could rest and
Yes.
get some meat.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah. Just start?
Hello. Could the cop come to order? Hi, I'm Marc Andrus. I'm the Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of California. Can you hear me? And I head the Episcopal Church's delegation to the COPs. And I'm super blessed that I'm part of America's All In. It's something that means a great deal to me. And the whole time that I've been in, President Fawn and I have been in the COP together and in America's All In. This is a special day at the COP. It's Gender Day. And I am honored to be speaking to the leader of the Quinault Nation, who has been in the leaders circle of America's All In for years, since 2016. And I wanted to just start by saying that it was Indigenous people, in my view, who saved the COP. When the IPCC report came out that said we should repeg the number from 2 to 1.5, it was Pacific Island Nation peoples who raised their hands and said, do you know that that is actually a safe number? Do you know that 1.5 is the goal we should have? And the IPCC took note, and they actually did the research and the projection, and they said 1.5 is a disaster. And so we know that, at least we know what we're overshooting. And that has reoriented the whole COP process, the whole UNFCCC process, to a more realistic view of what is a sustainable future. We are not on path for that. But it was Indigenous people who raised the alarm. I live in California. I live in San Francisco. And the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, in response to the incredible devastation of wildfires that have so reset the bar in California on what wildfires are, told me that he was in a meeting near Sacramento, and a group of Ohlone people were there, and they raised their hand in a discussion with the governor, and he wanted to know what their question was. And they said, we don't have a question. We are offering our wisdom to help you. We know the forests, and we are connected to the forest, and we have wisdom that can help California. Now this is becoming more and more a known stream of understanding, is that indigenous science, indigenous ways of knowing, need to run alongside Western science and not supplant one, not better than one, but complementary streams of knowing. So, Fawn, I wondered if we could start with that contribution of the indigenous peoples to saving the earth. It's so profound, it's complex, it's not one thing, but where would you like to enter that conversation?
Yes, thank you. And first of all, I just want to say what an honor it is to be in this place and be able to participate in this conversation. I guess I would start by saying for indigenous peoples, the world knows that we are on the front lines of climate change. They know we're disproportionately impacted, and they know we have little to no resources. And so, of course, being on the front lines of climate change, we started raising the alarms very early in the climate crisis. And even beyond our generation, our ancestors long foretold centuries ago of a day of reckoning. And we believe we are that seventh generation since contact. We are that seventh generation since treaty time. And we are the generation, our ancestors long foretold, that when that day of reckoning would come, when the earth was no longer sustainable, we had a sacred duty to step up. And so starting in 2008 at COP14, we began these conversations. And I'm just so very grateful to have had partners at We Are All In, because it was during those times when we were wondering what leadership role the United States would continue to carry. And so absolutely, it's based on our generation and generations that came before us that knew that this day would come.
That's wonderful. I know because of our friendship and our work together that your leadership in the Quinault Nation has also included sustainable business practices. Could you talk to us some about that?
Yes, absolutely. My tribe, the Quinault Nation, is located on the coast of the state of Washington. And as I said, early in my presidency in the year 2006, I was directly confronted with being on the front lines of climate change. We had millions of sockeye salmon return to our rivers in the 50s and 60s, just a generation ago. And the year I got elected, we only had 3,000 return. And I've had to declare multiple states of emergency. Our two villages that are on the coast, we're having to move to higher ground because the ocean is already encroaching during king tides. And so we just have a wide range. The Highway 101 that enters is the only access road to our main village, is almost in the ground now. The ocean is overtaking it. And so we're under a state of emergency due to our only access road. And so we had to be very strategic in thinking about not only securing the resources to move our villages to higher ground to restore the salmon, but that also brought in the business side of what we need to do. And so one of the goals I've had here at this particular COP is to really figure out how can we enlist the massive scale of resources, both public and private sector resources, when the world knows that we are on the front lines, we're disproportionately impacted, and we have little to no resources. And so our goal here is to continue to build relationships so that indigenous peoples can gain direct access to the resources that we need to bring home. And the other thing with our unique standing as sovereign tribal nations, we're able to enter international trade. Right. And so, for example, when the domestic companies couldn't access the international carbon market because the U.S. wasn't a signatory to Kyoto, tribal nations could do that. And so we've figured out ways in which we could attract foreign investment that otherwise would not even come to the United States. And so we're going to continue to advance that agenda here. It's a major agenda of ours. But again, our ancestors foretold of a day of reckoning, and we occupy a space where we have this traditional, timeless, ancient knowledge and wisdom that is place-based. So no matter where you go within indigenous communities, that knowledge began at the beginning of time to present day. It's rich and it's valuable. And the thing that we've really, I've taken to heart this year is that we're in the only position to access that. Nobody could buy their way into it. Right. Nobody could regulate their way or sue their way. And because we're holders of that knowledge, we have a direct duty and responsibility, a sacred duty, to come to these places to offer our knowledge, just as our elder did to the governor.
Yeah, Beautiful. The Gwich'in people in the Arctic Arctic Village, which is right next to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, are almost all Episcopalians, and so I have built relationships in that tribe, and they are deeply interconnected with the porcupine caribou herd, just as the Quinault people are connected to the king salmon. And that relationship with the caribou may be 14,000 years old. Yes. It's stunning to think about that. And one of their elders said, for almost this entire time, we have depended on them. Now they are depending on us. I wonder if you could talk about that interdependence with the king salmon. They're not just a resource, are they?
Absolutely, and I so appreciate that question because you're absolutely right. They're not a resource. We are interdependent, and I just came off of a sovereignty run, and we started this run in Oklahoma, and we ran through from Tulsa to western Oklahoma into New Mexico, Arizona, California, to open up our annual convention in Sacramento. And I had a first-hand experience with what you're describing. So we were in western Oklahoma at the Cheyenne and Arapaho. We had the Chief's Totem, which was a relative of Chief Seattle. It was a totem pole that joined the sovereignty run. And
Wow.
as we began to pray around this totem, a herd of buffalo approached us, and they began to circle our entire delegation. And we have an incredible video of this. And as we're praying, people are looking both ways because there's 1,000-pound animal breathing, and you could hear them snorting, and you could hear them breathing.
They were joining you.
They were joining us, and just in a circle, and they were just going around. And so at one point, I just closed my eyes, and you could just feel the strength and power of these incredible creatures, and just what they meant. And so it reminded me of our elder in the Pacific Northwest, Billy Frank Jr. He said, the salmon cannot get out of the rivers to go into court. They cannot get out of the rivers and lobby Congress. We have to be their voice. Right. And so I believe there's a reason we've gone through so much a large-scale genocide, and just we have multi-generations of challenges and hurt and pain and suffering. We have multi-generational strength and resilience so that we could be ready to have a direct relationship and know exactly what our relatives who are confronting environmental genocide are facing, and we're able to uplift them when they can't speak. And so I definitely felt the spirit of the animals and the buffalo, as well as going into Oak Flat, a sacred site at the San Carlos Apache. As we brought the totem pole into Oak Flat, the sky just opened up and it started lightning and thundering, and it was just very incredibly powerful, and there was no prediction of rain at all. But when we entered that area, it was a very powerful connection.
That is really beautiful, and it's the way the world really is.
Yes.
It's not the way we've imagined it to be. It's the way the world really is. That's really fantastic. The sovereignty run, that's another really important thing for us to talk about, isn't it?
Yes.
The idea of sovereignty is something that is incredibly important within tribal lives, and something that I think outside of tribal lives is not well understood.
Yes.
In the Diocese of California, where Indigenous people have no more reservation, have no more land that is theirs. They're Indigenous people there, but they don't have their own land. I learned recently that our diocese, our church, has two categories of church. They have parishes, which are kind of freestanding, independent. They've got more money.
Yes.
And their missions, which are more fragile, smaller scale. And the dividing line is land ownership. I finally realized that our Spanish-speaking congregations, none of them were parishes because they don't own land. They worship in other buildings. And I realized that our church had a colonist mentality. Well, we have a colonist mentality, but it was manifesting in that way. So I think that's one aspect of sovereignty, but I wonder What's important about that for me to understand from you?
I think the most important thing to understand about tribal sovereignty, and I'll put it in a faith perspective, and I always say this, that we have one prayer and one prayer only, and that is to live as our Creator intended on the lands gifted to our ancestors when time began. We want to be able to go to our sacred places. We want to be able to speak our languages. We want to have our ceremonies at Oak Flat. The United States Congress has transferred that sacred space to a multinational company to drill copper. Well, that is the place where the Apache people, they had the Apache Leap. It was where they leapt to their death as opposed to surrendering to the United States. It's where their young women go for coming of age ceremonies. And so I saw the press release that, said they'll be free to go there as long as it's safe. And so that told me somebody's anticipating at some point in the future it's not going to be safe.
Not gonna be safe.
And that's not religious freedom, nor is it the guarantee of a space that they've had from the beginning of time. And so tribal sovereignty really is the ability of tribal nations to exercise the full spectrum of decision making around their land, territory, resources, and people, just as God intended for us to do. And oftentimes we have to deal with others encroaching and taking unilateral action. And so you might hear a concept called free, prior, and informed consent.
Yeah.
And we consult with a lot of agencies, but they still, after we consult, they check the box, they'll proceed with unilateral action against our interests. And so at the international area, we're advocating to have decisive say over our land, territories, resources, and people. And the best example is the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Yeah.
That was something over the objection of not only the Standing Rock Nation, but tribal nations all across the country. And so we're hopeful that that policy is going to be implemented. It's adopted. And so our goal is to encourage implementation at the local level as well as at the national and international level.
That's wonderful. I was part of the Standing Rock protest, and when I was there, it was a group of faith people, and we burned a copy of the Doctrine of Discovery. Is that an area of importance for people to know about, the Doctrine of Discovery?
Yes, absolutely. So the idea that tribal nations, were discovered is... there were explorers who were lost, right? And so we took people in and we cared and we had open relationships. And from just that point of entry over the years, millions of our ancestors were brutally murdered. Millions of our children have suffered the consequences over the generations. When you look at what's happening with the boarding schools, and people are discovering, and some of our elders aren't calling them boarding schools anymore because every one of these boarding schools have cemeteries of children who were brutally murdered as young as infants, thrown into furnaces to be burned. It was that brutal and horrific. And so yes, the Doctrine of Discovery is just a basis that justified Western expansion, justified massive, large-scale genocide larger than the Holocaust. And there's a truth there that's not been told yet.
Right.
And we must, this country must not only confront the truth, and not only for us, but for all of the United States. Our country is built on this idea that we are that beacon of shining light,
yes,
that we support human and civil rights. And there's just a lot of pressure internationally when the U.S. goes outside as a matter of foreign policy. What about how you're treating Indigenous peoples
right
at home? And so we're working with this administration and fortunately other administrations prior to really elevate that relationship and have an era of truth, reconciliation, healing, and by doing all that, empowerment, so that we can confront the modern day challenges of the climate crisis and things like a global pandemic. And but we are knowing that doctrine must be revisited and revoked. So
yeah.
Yes.
Well, and known about. I mean, I think you said truth and reconciliation, and it seems to me that this is the big gap for reconciliation, is that we have some areas that we've just covered up.
That's right.
And the Doctrine of Discovery, I was not taught anything about it at all. I didn't know it existed until I was an adult and an older adult. And that, I think, is not really an accident.
No.
When the COP was in Katowice in Poland, that is 45 minutes from Auschwitz. And many people at the COP took the opportunity to go to Auschwitz over the weekend. I went twice. And the thing that really, well, it's all devastating. It's all a lot to absorb, too much to absorb. But the thing that really got me with this idea of truth was that when the Nazis knew that Auschwitz was going to be liberated, they sought to destroy the physical evidence of the atrocities there. They were in a very, very desperate race to destroy the physical evidence. And they were not successful. But it was shut down, and 1 year later, and I just find this almost impossible to take in, it was survivors of Auschwitz who came back to the site of their incarceration where they saw their families killed, and they became the people who oriented visitors to Auschwitz. And it is what Germany calls becoming a memory culture, where instead of hiding the truth, we look carefully at the history and work with it as a memory culture. And I've been on a campaign since then that the United States should become a memory culture, because then we would know about the doctrine of discovery, and it wouldn't be about valorizing it, but about repudiating it, but repudiating something we know what we're repudiating. I mean, I think this is what we're lacking. But let me move you. You talked about coming of age for young women. There's so many stories that are more famous about the coming of age, the Vision Quest for young men. But this is Gender Day at the COP.
Yes.
And I think this is an important moment, speaking to one of the great women leaders in the Indigenous world, to what would you want to say about gender, climate change, and Indigenous wisdom?
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that question. When I look at my mentors, one of the first tribal leaders that had a chance to take me aside as a young president was Wilma Mankiller, and she was the first principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. And I remember she said, Fawn, in the life of politics, you're going to have naysayers, you're going to have people trying to undermine you, you're going to have attacks, and that's just the nature of politics. But she said, just understand that that's background noise. Turn the volume down and don't let it stop you from the vision that you have. And that was such incredible advice to have on month 2 of being an elected tribal leader. And then through the years, as NCI president, I just had a recent opportunity to visit the very first NCI woman president. She was elected in 1977.
Wow.
Veronica Murdoch Homer. And the sovereignty run went from Phoenix on into the Palm Springs area and went right past Colorado River. So we went up to visit her, and I had a chance to go to her home, and she just talked about so many challenges that her generation had. And we honored Sue Maston from the Yurok Nation, who was the second woman president at NCI. So all 3 of us were gathered, and it was a pretty historic, the 3 Native women leaders of the National Congress of American Indians. But we all recognize that we still confront a great deal of misogyny in these spaces.
Incredible, really.
I've always said if my name was Frank Sharp, I would have a different path. And it's certainly true if I had that name. But we directly confront that, because I don't want the little girls coming up behind us to have to fight that same thing that we do. And so I think it's just uplifting to know that our long history of leadership within tribal nations, our women, our aunties, our grandmothers have a very special place, and it's our duty to teach the next generation and to ensure that they have a smooth path into leadership. And I just think it's so incredible that after generations of women leaders who envisioned us in an international place, we get to be that generation that a young girl from my tribe at the Quinault Nation has a clear and direct path to an international place. Yeah. And we get to be that generation that welcomes those future leaders. And I'm telling you, every time I'm around our young women leaders, our future's in good hands. Every time we hear them talk, they grew up in an era when they could learn their languages, when they could practice their culture and traditions, and as well as go to some pretty prestigious schools. So it's just it is a time where we value our Native women and the ancient wisdom of our elders, as well as the brilliance and bright shining star of our young women leaders rising.
That's wonderful. I think it is rising too. With the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000, one of the 8 goals was, of course, empowerment of women, and then that was moved into the sustainability SDGs, and so it's been there for 22 years in the UN space. But I feel like the power is building. In these last several COPs, the gender stream has become much more prominent, and we're recognizing that it's one of the most essential of all. Last year with the Glasgow COP, our delegation was all virtual, which was great because it meant that we could get from one meeting to another much faster. And one of the meetings that was just transformative to me, there was an economist who pointed out that gross domestic product doesn't include women's work in many cases. So women in villages are doing work. It's not necessarily just housework. They have industry, they have businesses, but the money's staying in the village instead of going into the economic stream of the country. So it doesn't get counted. And so the danger of that is what we can't measure, we can't appreciate in our way of being. So this idea of women's economy, and it's largely women's economy, that needs to be both measured and appreciated seems transformative to me.
Yes, and I see that in a broader context as well, that really brings to bear a sense of appreciation of the women's economy. I firmly believe that the value system that we now see, the commercial for-profit value system, is going to have to change. We're going to have to, and I believe our generation will witness a value system that monetizes and sees value in things like clean water, that sees value in things that are essential to our survival. And with that new economy that I think we're going to see evolve, we're going to see the types of value that you described. There's no way we can escape that if we truly want to be able to calculate, have metrics, and really, with no margin of error, in confronting this climate crisis, what is it we value, and how do we bring that into a market economy, and how do we make that translation so that it's very real and it's reflective of not only the commercial values, but what we value as human beings. And I firmly believe that's coming, and that's what we're witnessing happen, and it's truly transformative.
Really transformative. This has been an amazing conversation. I know that you all feel as I do that we're in the presence of a great being. Let's show some appreciation for President Fawn Sharp. Thank you so much. America's